The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
Hi, this is Arlene, and you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. Today, our guest for today, his name is Fadli Fawzi. He is a law student from the Management University of Singapore, sorry. And now he's with us to discuss about the dynamics of increased religiosity in Malaysia and Singapore. Hi, Fadli.
Hi, yeah. I'm from the Singapore Management University.
Yeah. So
Okay.
For you, right now we are Skyping live with you from Singapore. And before we
Mm-hmm.
start our conversation, can you introduce yourself better and also introduce um, the fundamental idea about what is the status quo of the religiosity in Singapore right now?
Well, my name is Fadli. I'm observer of political, social, religious developments in both Malaysia and Singapore, particularly on Islam. I'm not sure what you mean. What you mean by status quo? I think uh, the situation is that even though that Singapore Muslims live in a largely secular state and a multi-religious society, I think that the community itself is very religious. You can see that in various forms. For example, the way that people think or talk about issues in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a general question, so maybe it would help if you narrowed it down or ask on some specific issues.
I see. So in Singapore right now, when it comes to the Muslim community, the minority there, what is the general sentiment they have towards religion?
As I said, I mean, most Muslims in Singapore are quite pious. I would say the community itself is observant on most areas of religion. I think Islam plays a very important role in the Muslim community.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you have to be more specific if you wish to get some better answer. What are you what areas are you looking at specifically?
So
Maybe it would be good if maybe it would be good if you talked about some issues in Malaysia. Then I would comment about how they affect Singapore, the Singapore Muslim community.
okay, so I guess we can go issue by issue. The first issue I want to highlight is about when it comes to the way um, society, I mean, no, not society, when it comes to the way government handles religion. In the case of Malaysia, religion is the state ideology. In a way that you can see how religion has become part of the government's religion has become the backbone of part of government policy making, and also the way religion is part of the cover of the civil servants and also the government ministries and departments. At the same time, the department concerning religion, which is this religious department, Islamic religious department in a lot of different states and also within the federal government, has become increased in terms of their power, their funding, and their significance, and also their influence to society. But in the case of Singapore, Singapore is a very secular nation in a way that religion is not part of the religious backbone. This is from my understanding, but from your understanding, how religion has somehow infiltrate and become increased in terms of the way society and government view religion.
Well, I think that the Singapore government is a secular government. It does not claim its legitimacy of being Islamic or being Christian or favoring one religion or the other. However, that being said, Singapore society itself is multi-religious, meaning that there are different religious groups competing or or they exist in Singapore society. Because of this, the government has to deal with the the different religious groups in Singapore. I think that one way that, at least for the Muslim, when it comes to the Muslim community, the government does take a more proactive role in managing Muslim issues, because partly is historic, in that at the point of at the point of independence, I think the British left behind the same sort of legal infrastructure, legal religious infrastructure, which is governing Malaysia. The only difference is that I think that in Singapore, the religious bureaucracy, which is the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, has much less powers than Yakim. For example, I mean, Muiz doesn't go around catching people for halwat. However, I would say that Muiz does play an active role in managing the lives of Muslims, and part of this is administrative. It administers the halal certification, Hajj, and I think it also handles mosques and madrasas.
So are you saying that in terms of religious authority in Singapore, even though they might not hold a significant power in the Singaporean government, but they are actually becoming more effective and efficient in terms of handling Islamic issues? Would that be the case?
I think it's useful to not focus so much on the religious bureaucracy when it comes to Singapore, because I don't think that the religious bureaucracy is the main driver of religious values, even though they do play a role in this whole management. I think that they don't exist like the Malaysian religious bureaucracy.
So in a way that you are saying that religion in Singapore does not hold significant platform towards the way the government administer society. Would that be the case?
I think that increasingly we see different religious groups trying to compete for trying to influence public policy. For example, I think the most recent episode is regarding issues relating to LGBT issues. Because every year the LGBT community holds Pink Dot, which is an event in Hong Lim Park. So and it's a commemoration, or it's a celebration of their identity. So this year there was a backlash by the Muslim group, because according to them, this Pink Dot featured a Muslim woman wearing a tudung, and also Pink Dot was on Ramadan, the first night. But however, this cannot. I mean, you cannot just take this at face value, because Pink Dot has always been held at the same date. It's only that Ramadan is shifted. So coincidentally, this year it was held on the first night. And also, Pink Dot has always featured Muslim women wearing tudung. It's just good optics, being in a multi-religious society, to be seen to be inclusive. Or at least that's what I think, lah. So what the conservatives did was to align themselves with Christian conservatives, and they started this Wear White campaign now. So and these issues has been raging on. There's another follow-up issue of some library books being banned, or library books being being destroyed, because they were thought to it featured two gay penguins taking care of a baby penguin. So there was email sent to the library
I see.
and the library acted.
And I may add that just the news today, we reported that the comic magazine Archie's are also being banned because one of its magazine depicted a same-sex marriage scene among some of the character in the Archie's comic. So it seems like it has infiltrated in a way. Religion has infiltrated the way how society could act, but at the same time, the justification that that's not part of the social norms of Singaporeans, in Malaysia in particular, is pretty clear because the social norms of Malaysians should align itself with the social norms of Islam. So in a way, comics or any characters that or any material in general that has anything that is against the teaching of Islam usually will be strictly observed. And in the situation of Singapore, why religious sensitivity is at a very high level, in the sense that when some quarters of religious community feel threatened by certain material that they can find in public, the government would usually ban the material. Why is that so?
I think there are several issues that we need to discuss. Firstly, is that is the issue of administrative process. I think what we are looking here is that because a lot of this banning, a lot of this book pulping, a lot of this exclusions from the public sphere, it's becoming clear that this is part of the bureaucratic and administrative process. Rather, so it has been always quite opaque. So one good thing that this issue came out is that some quarters are asking, what is the policy for books? For example, someone that disagrees with a book being in the library, or someone disagrees with where it's being put. The issue with the Penguin book was that it was in the children's section. So some people said, why do you need to destroy the books? Why couldn't you just move it to another section? I think that it is an issue, because then it becomes the gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers are not democratically elected, or so it becomes quite subjective on the norms of who gets to decide. So I think there is an increasing discussion about the issue of process and the issue of public policy. I think the other issue is that we also see that with the last election, I think the current ruling party sort of lost a bit of power. Of course, they didn't. They still hold a greater than 2/3 majority, but they sense that the ground is not so sweet for them. They are vulnerable, and because of the way that things have panned out, that I think one of the major, because civil society in Singapore is not strong at all. It's not like Malaysia. It is very hard for the civil society groups in Singapore to mobilize people. It's just, although it is getting stronger, it is nothing compared to the religious groups which have been allowed to flourish for the longest time.
Mm-hmm. But why religious groups are allowed to flourish instead of being observed closely by government? And I want to talk about the context of Malaysia, because in Malaysia, certain religious groups that favors the government usually are being highlighted, not just within government but also in the media, in a lot of different public spaces and all that. But religious groups that have a more, I would say, progressive ideas or liberal ideas usually would be frowned upon, and their spaces would be not on the mainstream media or mainstream government endorsement. But that's because the government has a certain agenda that favors certain religious groups in Malaysia. So when the government's agenda that is anti-Shiaism, meaning that groups that are pro-Shiaism are being silenced. This is in the context of Malaysia, but what about in the context of Singapore?
again, from what I was saying just now, in Singapore, most of the civil society organizations were sort of discouraged. I think the biggest civil society, or the most influential civil society organization is Aware, and which is the women's rights group, and even they are quite limited, and they were subject to a takeover attempt by the Christian fundamentalists. Of course, that didn't work out, and Aware and a lot of the sort of more secular, more progressive people came and retook Aware from the Christian fundamentalists.
But why?
So
Sorry, you may continue.
yeah, so I think that it is. I mean that the Singapore government inheriting the colonial legacy from the British. I think the British had a very hands-off approach to religious groups, and I think religious groups do play important role in various aspects. I mean, the colonial government was not sort of a did not clamp down on religion. They saw that religion played a pastoral role. I mean, religion was important, and they didn't have to interfere with religion. It's only that they knew that they had to manage, but they knew that they had to manage religion because religion also could be potentially a subversive force. So to do that, I think that's why they encourage certain orientations towards religion, and strongly discouraged. And post independence, you see the same trend. There was the issue of the Marxist conspiracy, where those people there were a group of civil society activists who were active in the church, the Catholic Church, and they had sort of more progressive views, but they were accused of trying to subvert the state, and they were detained without trial. So I think that's why, in general, religion, at least a progressive approach to religion in Singapore is more muted, whereas more conservative forms of religion are more dominant. And of course, when it comes to Islam, you cannot separate it from the region itself. Muslims in Singapore are influenced by issues arising from Malaysia. I think thinkers, or at least I think scholars like Naqib Alatas in Malaysia, they are being read by people in Singapore, and issues which are highlighted in Malaysia are also being discussed and thought about by Muslims in Singapore.
Before we continue our next discussion, we will take a short break, and when we return back, I think more discussion on the role of society and the role of external forces, like the issues happening outside Malaysia and Singapore that sort of increase the dynamics of religiosity in both countries.
Voice of sharing, durian ASEAN.
Hi, this is Arlene, and you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. And today, again, we continue our discussion with Fadli Fawzi. He will be sharing with us his views on the dynamics of increased religiosity in Malaysia and Singapore. So, Fadli Fawzi, you're still there?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, so early on, our discussion mainly revolves around the role of government in terms of how, and also civil society in terms of how it sort of affects the dynamics of increased religiosity in both countries. But let's move on to the external forces itself. We all know that events happening since the 70s, when there was a Iranian revolution and the pan-Arabism, the rise of Arabs and all that, and also things that happen within our society in Southeast Asia as well. sort of affected the way Muslim view themselves and how they sort of shape their identity. And I think I can see it very clearly in the context of Malaysia, how Malay Muslim, for example, Malay female Muslim, they used to just wear selendang, just like a normal scarf that covers their head, a bit of their hair. But now they are strictly observing the Islamic dress code in a way that covers all their hair, and the clothing are covering all the necessary part that needs to be covered. That's just in the form of clothing, but also in other forms also has become much more Arabized in a sense that the way they eat, the way they observe certain festival and certain religious rituals is very, very different from the way their forefathers are doing this. And I think external events sort of shape the way, and also the way the education that they receive. A lot of in between the 70s until in the 90s, a lot of young people were sent to the Middle East to study, and they brought back a lot of the new ideas coming from the Arab world. That's how society are being shaped in Malaysia, the Malay Muslim society. But what about in the context of Singapore? Would it be any way similar?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, there are a lot of similarities from what you've been saying. I think that one thing at least interesting here, and I think it might also be similar in Malaysia, is that a lot of the new very religious people, they are actually university graduates. And if I were to study the because the university graduates in Singapore, the Malay becomes the middle class of the Muslim community. So they have a lot of spending power. They have a lot of social capital and cultural capital to decide how is it that Islam is practiced. And as I said, they had a lot of consumer power, and they actually are driving in part a more Islamized consumption. You have a lot of a greater consciousness of halal products, of Islamic products, and more of this sort of Islamic entrepreneurship kind of drive. So I think that is one strain which is really driving the increased religiosity in Singapore, because when it's when Muslim students graduate from university, secular universities, they actually have because I think that university life in Singapore can be quite alienating. So I think because of the minority situation, Muslims tend to gather together. We tend to mix around together for support, for companionship. So that sense of Islamic identity is heightened and is socialized. And when these students leave, they sort of have a greater sense of Muslim identity, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. What about
that's one.
What about Christian identity? Because
actually
Christians, the way Christians view themselves, their identity has become more stronger than ever before.
That's true, and I think that the universities in Singapore also are quite responsible, because I remember that there was one time where a Christian group in university was I think shut down for a year, because in their publicity material they sort of disparage people from other countries, the Buddhists, I think the Buddhists in Thailand, if I'm not wrong. And I think that there is another dynamic, I believe, within the Chinese community in relating to the Christians and the Buddhists, but I won't go into that. But similar to the Muslims, I think that these cell groups in school actually do have a very formative role in shaping and in gathering this the stronger Christian identity.
Yeah, in the context of Malaysia, I mean, I still remember the issue of Allah has never been such a huge issue, even back then when the word of Allah was being sort of debated and banned. But only recently, in the year after 2000, where the Christian groups started to be more organized and be more, I mean, their voices has become more louder. And it's also partly the awareness among Christians in Sabah and Sarawak, because those Christians in Sabah and Sarawak are mainly people who are Malay speaking, and they are concerned very much that they are unable to use the word Allah because of the ban that started in Peninsula. And because of that, the Christians in Peninsula, together with the Christians in Sabah and Sarawak, take over the issue and make it into, a reason for them to create a movement. Although it's not really like a clear movement, but in a way they are very vocal towards protecting their identity. In the context of Malaysia, it's kind of relevant because they are being seen as the minority, so they need to be more organized and to be more louder in terms of the way they defend themselves. But in the context of Singapore, Christians also have become more organized. I mean, you can see it. Many thousands of people gathered at the Wear White movement during the campaign against the Pink Dot rally. But why do they need to feel threatened? I mean, they are not the minority in terms of numbers in Singapore, isn't it?
Okay, I have two points in response to what you just said. Firstly, interestingly enough, because you mentioned the Allah issue, I think when I saw on Facebook, there was this, I think there's this former Malay opposition politician. He sort of highlighted that that an Indonesian church used the word Allah, and so he highlighted it to this. He tried to make it an issue, and apparently someone from I'm not sure. I think someone picked it up, and then it was. I think they talked to the church, and the church brought down the banner. So that issue is, interestingly enough, there are some spillovers into Singapore. Even though this was not picked up in the mainstream media, I could see it on Facebook. The other thing is about why is it that Christians feel threatened. I guess in Singapore, I guess it's the same reason why Muslims in Malaysia feel threatened. I mean, Muslims in Malaysia, I'm sure, are the majority, and I think they largely control political power. I think that maybe in part it could be religious entrepreneurs, people who, I mean, if you have a siege mentality, it's easier for you to mobilize people, to get people concerned, to move people. So I guess that in part explains why that explains the dynamics in both Malaysia and Singapore, why majorities would feel sort of threatened, especially in Singapore, because Christians do have a lot of cultural capital, even much more than I think the Buddhists, because English is basically the lingua franca, and English, with the use of English comes a lot of cultural capital, and people do see you as sort of as a higher. Some people, not all, do see you as a sort of a higher class because you use English. So Christians do have a lot of cultural capital.
And they are financially very loaded as well. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I think they are generally they are the better off in Singapore society. They are of the up. I would say they are of the upper middle class or upper class.
And it's a news that I picked up in 2012. I don't know whether it's still holds true now, that it's reported that Singapore mega churches Christian is investing in building malls.
Sorry, I think it was a City Harvest Church. Yeah, a lot of these churches, which I think they are the new evangelical churches, and it's quite interesting because they are. You get a sense that they are strongly influenced by the American churches. So a lot of their issues actually trickle over to Singapore. The LGBT issue I mentioned was one, and it is being driven by at least this evangelical pastor, and the way that they frame issues are the same. The same evangelical pastor who allied himself with the Muslim fundamentalists also gave blessings to Israel. So there is the internal tension even within that fundamentalist alliance.
What about the Malays in Singapore view themselves? They are now the minority in Singapore in comparison to Malaysia, and are they also holding the siege mentality that Malay Muslim in Malaysia are facing?
Well, I think that the dynamics are definitely different. I think that there are issues of discrimination and marginalization within the community, which somehow they are expressed in religious terms. The classic example would be the tudung issue. I think where different people from the Muslim community try to because in Singapore in some sectors you can't. I think it's a unofficial rule that you can't wear the tudung. I think in healthcare, in some service areas, you can't wear the tudung. So some sectors of the Muslim community have been pushing for this to be not allowed. I think there are this brings several interesting dimensions because it is actually an issue of social justice. Muslims should. There is essentially nothing wrong with Muslims being allowed to wear the hijab in public or in service. I think Singapore society does in general accept this, but I think also there is some suspicions in certain quarters that is this again some factions trying to push for greater visibility of religion in public sphere. Why? And a lot of these people are men. Why is it that you have men fighting for women's rights when actually a way forward in this issue is for Muslims to sort of ally themselves with different other groups such as women's groups to fight for anti-discrimination, not just the right to wear tudung in different places, but anti-discrimination of a broader front on anti-discrimination. But thus far, it has not translated such. It has not translated, and I think that the sort of a more fundamentalist orientation is responsible for this, for not being able to find allies, at least speaking against discrimination in general, rather than the tudung issue as a narrow issue on its own.
What about in terms of the community themselves? I would like to highlight that in Malaysia, even the moderates are becoming much more conservative. It used to be, during the early days prior to the independence or during the 50s and 60s, society are much more open to different ideas. You even have a lot of different. Muslim were even engaged in different activities that nowadays they would not do it, in a way. For example, in festivals or during weddings, they would have the joget. The joget is a Malay dance that they participate between the man and the woman, and these activities just disappear. When the more the Malays in Malaysia become much more religious, and it seems like the trend has becoming extreme to the extent it's not just the Malays but even the Christians and other religious community has becoming more I would say Puritan in the way they practice religion. And one of the reason that I can see is in terms of the way society are being educated. In the past, education were mainly, you go to the public school and then you go to probably in the evening for a Quran recitation school or agama school. But nowadays it's much more comprehensive, and young people are being spoon-fed with a lot of religious information and knowledge, not just in schools but also in the media. If you open to the channels in a lot of the Malay medias, majority of the shows or the dramas has a religious message to it, and this sort of increase the way society see themselves in terms of how they identify themselves, and a lot of the Malay Muslim are gearing towards a more Arabized society and community. The same with society of different religions as well. They are they identify themselves mainly based on either their race and religion rather than as a national as a whole. Would that be the same in the situation with Singapore, and how society view themselves, how they become more religious?
Well, I think that this is part of the long. I mean, there are many reasons for this. For more Puritan religious, I think your point is about why is it that people are adopting a more Puritan religious orientation these days.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are many factors for this. I think you cannot move away from firstly that the influence of some of a country like Saudi Arabia, where they have the money and they are the sort of the gatekeepers to Mecca. So they have a lot of influence on the direction of where the Muslim community is going.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I think part of it is a sort of an existential crisis which the community is facing as a whole, and I think that there is a need to move forward, but before we move forward, I think there is a need to sort of talk about what are the issues facing the community. And I think both the Muslim community in Singapore, the Malay Muslim community in Malaysia and Singapore are facing a whole host of problems, social, economic, and I think that as we address these issues, the religious orientations that people have will also change. But I think because of certain political factors and as I mentioned, the external forces such as external forces, I think that is why we have difficulty moving on from. I mean, if you look at China is not. They're not saying we should bind our women's feet because this is how the Chinese did it in feudal times. Because China has moved on. China, at least from even Confucian, the sort of Confucian ethics. It's more modern. It's trying to handle the issues which are facing it as a society. Whereas I think that is a problem that maybe that there is a lack of courage to face these issues, because these issues are huge and these issues are really scary, for a community which has very little resources to face. But if we don't stop talking, I mean, if we don't look at these issues, I think we will never get out of this the kind of
Sorry,
and if we don't move towards these issues, we will never move away from this kind of orientation. I mean, we will move away more and more from the issues of the world which are confronting us today.
Mm-hmm. So the way forward for all this, I know there's a host of things that we need to improve or we need to re-examine ourselves. But if there's one particular area that you can pick that you think that is important for us to focus in terms of trying to understand ourselves, it's not a way to decrease religiosity among a society, but in a way trying to put priority in place. What will be that one area that you
I think one thing I really liked about the Indonesian religious scholars was that this idea of membumikan religion. Religion has to look at its social reality. What is the social reality rather than an idealized form of text. These are the laws. We die must follow these laws. But how do we translate the religious values which are eternal, which values of kindness, of justice, of freedom, and apply to the issues that we are facing today: discrimination, marginalization, oppression, tyranny, social inequalities. So I think when we ground our religious values to the social issues of today, I think that is the way forward. I would like the Malay Muslim community to go, at least in this field.
So that's all for today. Thank you very much, Fadli Fawzi, for sharing your views with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show.
Welcome. Bye.